and strategic vision. And I'm happy that somebody signed up for this. I don't know if this was everybody's first choice or second choice or whatever. But I think it's a little bit challenging, and it wasn't an easy one to sign up for, because what do I need? What are we really going to learn? So I think that it's fully showed up. One thing that kind of runs through everything that I do as a coach or a teacher of debate is that I try to get students to understand that a great debater really kind of recognizes their strategic position, they recognize what's going on, and they figure out how to win debates even when it's difficult, or even when the path to victory isn't clear. And I try to kind of imbue those lessons in a lot of different things that I teach. So if I'm teaching about a critique, or I'm teaching about a counterclaim, or I'm teaching how to give a 1AR, I think some of these themes run through all of that. What I see when I work with a lot of students is that your instinct is that you would like me to provide you with a checklist. And when I listen to you ask questions of other instructors, which you're really asking for it, instructor, please provide me with a checklist. Please tell me if I do the following, 3 or 4 or 5 things, and I do them all, then I will win, and I will win the debate. So please help me, instructor, with my checklist. And I fundamentally disagree with the idea that there is such thing as a checklist, or that there is a one-size-fits-all approach to doing anything in debate, whether it's giving a 1AR, extending a critique, answering the politics dissent, doing cross-examination. Each debate is similar in many ways, but each debate is different enough that that kind of one-size-fits-all checklist approach leaves you vulnerable to a smart strategic opponent. And I think that the goal of this lecture is to give you some things to think about, and to give you kind of some approaches to debate, or some sort of what I would call philosophies of debate, that will help you think differently about debate, so that you think of being a great debater as being an artist or being a magician more than being a technician. And I want you to think about debate as a strategic space where you have a lot of control over the outcome of the debate, not a tactical space where your moves are kind of predefined for you. That's kind of that's the motivation. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go through 6 distinct kind of lessons or philosophical premises, 6 species about debate. But before I do that, I'm going to define the 2 terms that are in the title of this lecture. The first is situational awareness, and this is a term that I use all the time, and it comes from military applications. The best definition, or the easiest one, is from the Coast Guard Training Handbook. It says situational awareness is the ability to identify, process, and comprehend the critical elements of information about what is happening to the team with regards to the mission. More simply, it's knowing what is going on around you. Okay? I think that same concept makes a lot of sense. It clearly makes sense for someone who's a member of the military, who's a military mission, but I think that it makes sense in debate. You're part of a debate team, you have a clearly defined mission, and it is important for you to identify, process, and comprehend the information about what is happening to your team as your team embarks on the mission of winning the debate. It's really important to accurately assess your surroundings. So it's not enough to just kind of be attentive to your surroundings. You have to have an accurate picture of what's going on in order for you to successfully meet your mission. According to the Coast Guard, so when they're training new Coast Guard personnel about how to have better situational awareness, they warn that there are a bunch of different barriers to effective situational awareness. They say one barrier is perception based on faulty information or faulty information processing. So you kind of are attentive to something, but you get it wrong. Excessive motivation, and the way that this applies to debate is just kind of tunnel vision or narrow-mindedness. You just kind of get stuck on a particular outcome, and you just kind of think that this is the way debate is, or this is the way that this debate is going, and you kind of lose track of your surroundings. The next one is complacency. You just kind of forget to pay attention. It seems comfortable, the debate seems like it's previous debates, you just kind of know what's going to happen, you go through the motions, and you miss important cues or important perceptions that would help you adapt to the specific circumstances. They also warn about overload, which is when you don't really know which pieces of information accessible to you are the most important ones, the ones that you really need to pay attention to. You just kind of lose focus, get overwhelmed, and then make bad decisions. And they also warn about fatigue, and that's pretty obvious. I think all of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, you can do better when you are well rested and when you are kind of mentally prepared to debate your best. And so that's something that I talk about sometimes. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth about that today, but I did want to at least mention it. So in terms of situational awareness in debate, the most important thing is perception. That's the most important variable. It's our mental picture of what's going on around us, of reality. The Coast Guard says that the amount and quality of information available limit all pictures of our current operational state. Insufficient information makes it difficult to ensure that our mental picture is always aligned with reality. And what they mean by that is that in order to meet your mission, in order for your team to accomplish its mission, your team has to have a good, accurate sense of what's going on. And if you have the wrong idea about what's going on, you're very likely to fail in your mission. I think that's true of anything that we do in life, and certainly of debate. Some pieces of advice that I think are debate relevant, and the reason that I really like this term in terms of debate. Our situational awareness, our perception of what's going on around us can be shaped incorrectly by past experiences. So we act based on information or knowledge that applies to the past, but not necessarily the present. So for example, I'm the 2AC. This 1NC seems like a race critique. I've debated a race critique before. There we go. I know how to answer this race critique. I'll do it like last time. I will win. That's a false perception. Maybe there's something different about this race critique. Maybe the context of the debate is different. Maybe the judge is different. Maybe the argument is different. Maybe the strategic interactions with other arguments is different. You've kind of acted based on false information. You thought it was last round's race critique, not this round's race critique. Another thing they warn about is expectations. So we tend to interpret information in ways that confirms what we think is going to happen. So we have a certain preconceived conception about what this debate will be like. We think it's going to go down in this way, or we think it's going to go down in that way, based on whatever information we have at hand. And we have a very hard time grasping the reality that maybe that's not how it's going to go down. So an example, I really think that the consult counterplan is theoretically legitimate. And I read the consult counterplan in every debate. I make all these arguments. I'm going to definitely win that it's theoretically legitimate. In this debate, I made all of my good arguments. The other team wasn't very good, and the judge voted against me. What a stupid judge. What a bad decision the judge made. We kind of put our head in the sand, and we fail to recognize that our conception of what was going to happen in the debate, if a series of events was happening, our conception of what happens if we go for that argument or if we execute a certain strategy differs from the actual outcome of what happens if we go for that argument or go for that strategy. And then the last thing they warn about are filters. And what they mean by that is that when we get information, we tend to filter it, and sometimes we don't use it. So we filter out the information that doesn't match our mental map of what's about to happen or our mental picture of what's going on. So an example, you debate a team, a couple of times, and you're affirmative against them, and both times they go for politics in the case. So you're debating them for the third time, and maybe they beat you in those first two, and they're going to go for politics in the case. We got to beat them. We know what they're going to do. They're definitely going to go for that. But then you don't notice that in the cross-section of the 1AC, they start asking questions that seem like they're kind of setting up the critique. The critique shells a little bit longer than usual in the 1NC. Those normally should key you off, maybe they're thinking about going for the critique, but you don't even notice that information because it doesn't fit your mental picture of the debate. It doesn't fit your preconception. They're going to go for politics in the case, so you don't adapt to the information that you see in your situational awareness as well. So that's situational awareness. Number 2 is strategic vision. This morning, John Odom from the Navy described strategy as ends, ways, and means. And by that, he means that strategy is identifying your goals and then kind of cataloging or figuring out what the resources you have at your disposal are to achieve those goals. And then the hard part is designing ways to match those things together. So how can you take the resources at your disposal to accomplish the goal that you have set out for yourself? And that's distinct from tactics. Tactics are kind of the way that we do things. It's the ways part of strategy. Strategy is bigger than just tactics. It's not just the ways. It's figuring out our goal, and it's figuring out what resources we have available to us so we can select the best tactic. And I think that's particularly true of debate. So strategic vision and strategic planning kind of go hand in hand. And by strategic planning, I mean having an idea of how you're going to accomplish your goal. So thinking through, what is my goal? What is the direction that I want to take the debate? And how can I use the things available to me, whether that's speech time, prep time, pre-round prep, cross-examination, evidence, thinking time in the debate. All of the resources available, how am I going to create a plan to deploy those resources toward the achievement of my goal? The vision part of it is also important, and I think it's vision in the sense of a noun and vision in the sense of a verb. So in the sense of a noun, vision is an overarching aim or purpose for the debate. And there are several things that make a vision of the debate strategic. One thing is that it has to be realistic. Sometimes our strategies are unrealistic. We think that this is our goal for the debate, but in reality, that's a very difficult goal to accomplish, and that goal doesn't map well to the strategic context of the debate. It has to be, therefore, appropriate to the particular, not just appropriate to the general. So in a particular debate, your strategy needs to acknowledge the context in which that strategy is being deployed. And finally, it has to have room for maneuverability or adjustment in the face of adversity or in the face of problems with your tactics. So if your strategy doesn't allow you flexibility if something goes wrong, then it's not a very good strategic vision for the debate. As a verb, vision is a way of looking at or approaching a situation. And I think I often use strategic vision as a verb. It's kind of a skill that students have. Some students have great strategic vision. Other students seem to not have very good strategic vision. And I think I use that in similar ways that people describe athletes. So people would describe a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers as having great strategic vision. And when they say that, what they mean is that he just kind of has an uncanny ability to read defenses and kind of see what's going to happen before it happens, and therefore he's a more effective quarterback. I think the same concept applies to debaters. Some debaters just kind of seem to know what's going to happen. They kind of seem to know what the judge is thinking or what their opponents are thinking. And they seem to just kind of always have this uncanny ability to win close debates or to get the job done in difficult circumstances. And maybe they don't have the best evidence, or maybe their partner messed something up, or maybe the other team was really well prepared. And somehow they just kind of see things that other people don't necessarily see, and they win the debate. I think some debaters have that. Not very many debaters have that, but I think all debaters can aspire toward that. And I'm going to try to equip you with some of the things that I use to help debaters achieve that kind of state. I think you should all aspire to be described in that way. You should all aspire to have others, judges, coaches, your opponents, describe you as a student with excellent strategic vision. So there are 6 lessons or themes or maxims or whatever that I would like to share with you today about how to accomplish better situational awareness and better strategic vision in debate. Roman numeral number 1, you must empathize with your opponent. I do a full lecture about judge psychology, and you can kind of consider this lesson or maxim opponent psychology. There are kind of 2 parts about this. The easy part that I think most people understand intuitively and do is that you have to scout and therefore know your enemy. You kind of need to know your opponent. A lot of people, though, have too narrow of an understanding of what that means. So I think when you're scouting your opponent or when you're trying to learn about your opponent, your goal should be to be able to predict their behavior so that you can design strategic plans, strategic visions that exploit the weaknesses in their tendencies or exploit the weaknesses in what you expect them to do. You can kind of force them to do things that you know they will do if you do certain things, and then if they do what you expect them to do, based on kind of nudging them in that direction, you can win the debate. Okay? That's the goal of knowing your opponents. So the first part of this is the part that you're relatively good at, and that's scouting opponents' arguments. Okay? So using the wiki, using round reports, asking friends, figuring out what teams have said. What's their affirmative? What's their negative strategy? What did they go for in their 2N argument? I think a component of that some people are a little less on, but I think you at least understand why this is important, is kind of scouting second line of things. How do they answer the critique that you want to go for? How do they, what do they say against new affirmatives? What do they say against new affirmatives in a certain category on this topic? What do they do if someone breaks a new exploration affirmative? What do someone do what do they do if someone breaks a new kind of critical affirmative? I think it's also important to figure out what they do in cross-examination. So what questions do they ask the 1AC and why? That's a really important question for any team that kind of likes to set up critique arguments or process arguments in the process. How do they answer questions in process that are relevant to your strategy? Just kind of figure out what they tend to say. And the more that you know that they tend to say in debates, the more tendencies you are familiar with, the more you know about the argumentative map that you are about to confront. So you can never have perfect knowledge. What are all the arguments in their electronic tub? What are all of the things that they feel comfortable going for? You can't know that, but you can know a lot of that. You can have a pretty good assessment of their capabilities and their tendencies just by scouting their arguments. But the second part, and the thing that I don't think that people understand or conceptualize appropriately, is that you need to scout their psychology. Most generally, is this team a risk-averse team, or is this team, risk-taking? Do they like risk? Do they like to play it safe, or are they sort of one of the live-on-the-edge kind of teams? How do they define themselves as debaters? I think that helps a lot. Do they self-identify in a particular way? Do they kind of define themselves as debaters in terms of, we're a very straight-laced policy team? Do they define themselves as very transgressive? Do they like being the transgressive critical team? Do they love being the kind of crazy impact turn team that As a debater, I go for impact terms, or I'm the hegemony debater, I defend hegemony. Do they have kind of trollish tendencies? I think that's really important. Some students just like to kind of mess with people in debates. You need to know that about your opponent. Do they like to kind of troll a little bit? Do they like to kind of throw arguments in to catch you off guard? Do they like to kind of be ironic? Is that how they identify themselves as a debater? Are there certain arguments that they gravitate toward, or that they kind of personally identify with in a way that would cause them to use those arguments when prompted to do so? So maybe they really like going for conditionality on the affirmative, and they think of themselves like, I'm the debater who goes for conditionality. I really like going for conditionality. Or maybe they really like to say that global warming is good. So any opportunity that they get to say global warming is good, they'll impact turn and say global warming is good. You kind of need to have a sense of who they think they are as debaters. And what you can garner from that is just kind of basic instinctual tendencies. You can kind of have a general idea of what the other person is thinking throughout the debate that is different than what a general kind of generic opponent would be thinking. The other thing to figure out is what bothers them in debates. What really kind of gets under their skin as a debater. And this doesn't mean like what makes them personally upset, but what skill sets kind of are they weaker on, and what tendencies can you exploit? What kind of vulnerabilities do they have in their armor? Maybe they're a team that really relies on preparation and kind of having everything planned out in advance. They really like that predictability, and when they're on their predictable, well-prepared ground, they just kind of steamroll people, and they're an outstanding team. But if they get off of that a little bit, they struggle. Or if they get off of that in particular ways, they struggle, or they really don't like that. Maybe they like really big, kind of broad, fast debates, but when they are challenged to kind of explain things at a deeper level, when the debate gets smaller, they don't like that as much, because they rely more on being fast and kind of covering a lot of arguments instead of being able to really explain things, or able to kind of win close comparative debates. Maybe they like the kind of close, narrow debates, but they struggle to keep up when the other team challenges them and kind of deprives them of the opportunity to sit on arguments and kind of make those judge connections. You can figure out a lot about how teams are going to react by figuring out what teams are uncomfortable with. And it might be something as basic as this team really hates it when the debate becomes about theory, and it might be more nuanced. This team really hates it when you kind of force them to only deal with one argument. They really like it when the debate is broad, or vice versa. Once you kind of understand the psychology of your opponent, you can better adapt kind of some of these principles that I'm going to talk about in a moment about your universal opponent to the specific opponent. And the more you know about your opponents, not just their arguments, but their preferences, their tendencies, their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities, the things that they are comfortable with, the things they are uncomfortable with, the better you can predict what's going to happen, and the better you can strategically plan to win the debate, taking advantage of their weaknesses. The facts of debating. So that's all stuff that's very specific to your opponent. There are also things that are just generally true about all opponents. And that's what I would call the facts of debating. So when I do the judge psychology lecture, I say the facts of judging. Here are the parallels, the facts of debating. These are things that I think are true of all opponents. It's kind of like the realism of debate opponents, right? I just think that these things are structurally true. Number one is that their primary goal is to win. As such, they will tend to do everything within their power to defeat. I think that's just generally true. You can kind of know that about your opponents. Number two is that they prefer easy wins to hard wins. As such, they will tend to seek the path of least resistance to win the battle. Number three is they don't want to embarrass themselves. As such, they will not deviate too far from their typical approach unless they have very good reason to do so, usually overridden by preference for easy win or preference for win. And number four, they are pressed for time. As such, there is only a limited number of arguments that they can make in any given speech. Those things are true of anyone you will ever debate. Okay? Those are just sort of the facts of being a debater. Knowing that, you need to put yourself in the shoes of your opponent and figure out, based on those kind of realist assumptions about opponents, what they are likely to do if you do what you want to do. So we're going to talk later, one of the remaining lessons, we'll go into more detail about this. But the reason that it's so important to kind of just understand what it's like to be an opponent is that when you understand what it's like to be an opponent, and it's pretty easy, because you all are someone else's opponent. You have a lot of experience just kind of being a debater, put in the debate position. You can then better predict what they're going to do. You can better predict what arguments they're going to make. You can better predict what choices they're going to make. You can better predict how they're going to react to adversity. You can better predict how they're going to react when they make mistakes. They're not going to give up, right? They're not going to stop debating. If you kind of push them into a corner, you can anticipate, based on what would happen if you yourself were pushed into that corner, that they're going to try to do something. So one example of this that I think is helpful, and we'll go into more detail on a future point, if your strategy against a particular affirmative is really good, it's well researched, it's kind of rock solid, you're really well prepared, it exploits a vulnerability in the affirmative, and you execute that strategy really well, the affirmative is not just going to give up. The affirmative is not going to say, oh, you got this, lose. The affirmative is going to find a way to seek a victory that avoids having to engage with that strategy. The common and easiest way is to go for a theory, to go for conditionality. So if you know that, then when you have your rock solid, very well prepared negative strategy, it makes sense to actually spend less time on that well prepared, very well architected negative strategy and spend more time on conditionality, because the more you beat them with your airtight, excellent negative strategy, the more incentive they have to go for conditionality. The same thing is true when you're affirmative. If you have excellent answers to their topicality argument and you decisively win at your topical, they're not going to go for topicality, they're going to go for whatever their other strategy is. So if you feel really good that you're going to win the topicality debate, don't continue to overkill the topicality debate, because knowing your opponent, you will know that just the facts of being your opponent, they will say, I'm getting beat on this topicality, I'm going to go for this other strategy. And so you have way more control over what your opponents do than you think you do. They are not unpredictable, anarchic actors. They act according to very clear structures and impulses and just sort of psychological constructs. And the cool thing about that is those structures and psychological constructs and impulses are all the same impulses that you yourself have, which is why empathy is so important. Empathy is putting yourself in their position, feeling the debate or approaching the debate as if you were them, as if you were the opponent. And the better you are at empathizing, the more you can put yourself in the position of your opponent, the more strategically you will see the debate, and the better you will appreciate your ability to win the debate, and kind of just how you're doing in the debate, the better situational awareness you will have. Roman numeral 2, the next thing you need to do to have better situational awareness and better strategic vision is empathize with your judge. There's a whole lecture about this, and it's about judge psychology. And I might do another version of that this year, but there's a version of that that's on YouTube that I would encourage everyone to watch. And I'm not going to rehash all that, because I wanted to do some kind of new stuff this year. But the same way that empathizing with your opponent helps a lot in figuring out the map of the debate and how you're doing in the debate and what you should do next to kind of win the debate, or to put yourself in a better position to win the debate, because you can never guarantee that you can win the debate, is to put yourself in the position of your judge. Put yourself in their shoes, kind of view the debate as they would view the debate, and figure out from that perspective what the winning strategy is and what the losing strategy is. Some students just really struggle with empathy. They can't see the debate from their opponent's perspective, and they certainly can't see the debate from their judge's perspective. And as a result, they kind of inaccurately assess their own arguments, and they inaccurately assess the arguments of their opponents. They tend to think, I think that I'm right about my affirmative. I don't understand how anyone could not think that I'm right about my affirmative. Or I really think that I'm awesome at debating, and I've really executed well. I just kind of said all the things I wanted to say. I gave a great speech, but if you don't understand it, maybe the judge didn't see it that way. Maybe the judge didn't understand your arguments. Maybe you were difficult to follow. Maybe your arguments were difficult to flow. Maybe conceptually you've kind of made an assumption that the judge doesn't share, and so therefore the two perspectives are kind of not matching up. You begin from an assumption, and then if that assumption is true, your map of the debate is accurate. But you never thought to explain that assumption or justify that assumption so that you and the judge are on the same page. The same lesson about scouting your opponents applies to scouting your judges. The better you know your audience, the better you can deliver a speech, the better you can, try to get a job in a job interview, the better you can try to get into college in a college interview, the better you can make a friend. The more you know about the person that you are talking to, the better able you are to design conversations, and that's really what we're doing in debate, just designing a conversation that play to their biases or their preferences, that kind of speak their language. Great debaters are often described as speaking the language of the judge, or thinking like a judge. This student is very good, but they're missing something. This student, maybe their technical skills aren't quite as good, but they really just kind of think like a judge. They really just speak the judge's language. They kind of you might hear that generally, or you might hear that specifically. A judge might say, this particular student, they kind of always win my ballot. I feel like they're just really speaking my language. I understand what they're saying. I understand their arguments. I just feel like we're on the same wavelength. It's like they just kind of know what I need them to say in order to win the debate. The way to know that is to scout. And the way that you scout is not just to read judge philosophies, but to watch people judge. Watch people that judge you. Listen to the language that they use. Be very vigilant about recording it and writing it down, and then recycling that language. So if your judge uses the language like, you should really talk about necessary versus sufficient on this counterplan, or you hear them saying that to you, certainly the next time you have that judge, use that language, because that's the language that they're comfortable with. That's the language that they themselves use to describe a debate concept to you. But the even better way to do that is to watch other debates and to watch them talk to other students. Maybe they talk about the topicality non-military. I think the way you should frame it is like asset versus ownership. I like that language. Or maybe they don't even say that they like that language, but they just use that language in talking to other students about a different debate. Note that, and then if you have that judge and you're talking about topicality military, you can then use the language that they themselves have used to communicate an argument that in a different debate you might use a different label for, or you might use a different tagline for. Pay attention to your judges in other debates, and then certainly in the debate that you are in. Are they paying close attention? Are they nodding? Are there any non-visual or non-verbals that they are communicating to you visually, or just you can feel whether they are feeling the arguments of the other team positively or negatively, whether they are feeling your speech positively or negatively. You just have to be very sensitive and be very attuned to any change in the judge's behavior and pay attention to it. That doesn't mean that you have to overreact. Sometimes maybe the judge just noticed that their favorite soccer team gave up a goal, and so you notice like a momentary sadness or whatever, a momentary change in their disposition. But the better you get at just being attentive to your judges, in the same way you should be very attentive to your opponents. You just get a feel for when they're feeling very confident, or when they're feeling a little down, or when you've got something, or when they give away what they're going for. The same thing is true of judges. You can just pay close attention, understand that they're in a tough position, and that it's hard to make a decision in a debate, and then help them make the decision that you want them to make. And as we know, because you're a debater, and the facts of a debater are, number one, you want to win the debate. So this one I'm not going to go into a ton more depth because I have a whole lecture about this, but I think that's the second maxim. Empathize, not just with your opponents, that's number one, but empathize with your judge. Number three, or Roman numeral three, constantly assess relative win probability. Constantly assess relative win probability. The Word document that has the appendices in it, the first block title has a few links about this. The concept of win probability is something that comes from baseball originally, but it can be applied to any competitive game or competitive environment. In baseball, win probability is the percentage chance that a particular team has to win the game based on, and in baseball, it's the score, the inning, the outs, the runners that are on base, and the run environment based on historical data. So, sabermetricians, people who study baseball scientifically, have looked at all, crunched the numbers using computer algorithms and computer programs, all of the games of baseball that have been played in Major League Baseball forever. And they can calculate, historically, if a team is in this position, what is their chance of winning the game. In debate, win probability is just the relative percentage chance that a particular team will win the debate based on the facts of that debate in the current situation. So, at the beginning of the debate, depending on the facts of the situation, that win probability for the affirmative team might be 50%. Both teams are evenly matched. We don't really have any reason to believe one team has a better chance than the other. It's a relatively even topic. It could be 50%. It could be dramatically different. One team is very good, very experienced. They have a side that they're better on. The other team is weaker on the side. They're less experienced. Maybe one team has an 80% chance of winning the debate as the debate begins. And then everything that happens in the debate, every speech, every cross-examination, every argument, every point that is made, affects the relative probability of one team winning the debate versus the other. And it's a zero-sum issue, obviously. If you open some of those links, you can see the relative win probabilities of some games. So the third link is Game 6 of last year's NBA Finals. And there's these dramatic changes in win probability. It's one of the most dramatic win probability graphs ever. It was almost certain that the Mavericks were going to win. And then, the Heat won in a close, historically weird game. The same thing can happen in debates, but a lot of times the win probability graph just ebbs and flows throughout the course of the debate. But there are some things that you can think about as you think about strategy is that if you are in a relatively strong position in terms of win probability, so if you assess that your chance of winning debate is relatively high, then you probably ought not take dramatic risks. You ought not deviate too much from the plan or the strategy, and you should kind of stay the course, because staying the course seems like it is likely to result in victory. If, on the other hand, your assessment of your win probability is that things aren't going well, and if you kind of stick with it and stay the course, you're going to lose, then more dramatic risk-taking seems justified or seems prudent. Because if you do what you're doing now, your assessment is very likely to lose. If you do something different, if you kick out of one of the advantages and straight turn a dis out of the 1AR and something like that, or you spend a lot of time with conditionality in the 1AR, if you're the affirmative or if you're negative, you kind of make some cross-application, or you concede something to take out another thing that they've said and then go for a different strategy or whatever, like kind of those dramatic, game-changing strategic decisions, those are much more justified if your assessment is that you're likely to lose, and I think that should just make intuitive sense to you. In order for this to work, unlike in baseball, where we have historical data and kind of statistical metrics, because there's a stoppage between every play, we kind of mathematically assess the relative likelihood of any team winning. In debate, we have to be our own win probability assessors. And that can be the most challenging part for a lot of students, because you all kind of struggle to think, like, what if I'm going to lose? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm not doing the best job? What if my opponents are good? What if what they've said has value? What if the judge kind of agrees with their argument? What if I'm not winning? A lot of students really struggle with that whole idea. Like, some students, I think, even our coach, you should always think that you're winning. You should always act like you're winning. I agree with the second part. You should always act like you're winning, at least in the sense that you think you're going to win in the end. That doesn't mean that you should have like false confidence, or that you should kind of think that you're winning when you're not, because that doesn't make any sense. If you're not winning, you have to figure out that you're not winning in order to fix that. If you think that you're winning, even when you're not winning, then there's basically no hope that you're going to win the debate, because you think that you already are, so you're not going to change your behavior. So one of the things that students with excellent situational awareness and strategic vision do is that they realistically and harshly criticize themselves and their own arguments. That doesn't mean that they think that they're bad, or that they are a bad debater, or that all of their arguments are terrible. That would lead you to have inaccurate assessments of relative win probability. But instead, they kind of are realistic critics. They understand the flaws in their evidence. They understand that their app has some problems. They understand that their critique's not perfect. They understand that their framework tricks aren't going to just automatically win the debate. They understand that sometimes they aren't the best at framing arguments and rebuttals. They know they're not perfect. But at the same time, they understand that there are parts of their critique that are good, or there are parts of their affirmative that are good, or they are really good at explaining a certain concept in rebuttals, and they know their strengths as well. To be a great debater, I think you have to be willing to believe that you are wrong. And unless you really believe that you could be wrong, you will have a very hard time with a lot of the concepts that I'm going to try to communicate to you today. Because if you think, you can't kind of half-heartedly do this. You can't be like, well, I don't think I'm wrong, but if I was wrong, what would I be wrong about? You can't do that kind of trick. You have to genuinely believe that you were wrong and figure out, if you were to genuinely believe you were wrong, what would the reason be that you were wrong? Or what would the genuine reason be that you would think you were losing the debate? Or that if the debate proceeds as expected, the judge is going to vote for the other team? I think you should constantly be thinking about that throughout the debate. And then there are a couple of kind of maxims to think about as you think about the shape of a debate and the way the debate evolves. After the 1AC, the affirmative's win probability should increase. The way the affirmative win probability increases is by delivering a powerful 1AC, a smart 1AC, a 1AC that's good, that makes connections with the judge. The judge is kind of feeling the app. The judge feels like voting affirmative. After the 1AC, that should shoot up. If it doesn't shoot up, then the 1A hasn't done a very good job of delivering the 1AC. The cross-sex of the 1AC should hit that down a little bit. The negative should make up some ground. The negative should be making points and developing credibility. That's their first impression. They should be, the judge should think, wow, this is a well-prepared team. This is a smart team. This team is asking good questions. This team knows what's going on. I'm looking forward to hearing the negative strategy. I can anticipate some threads that they might be raising based on the cross-sex. I'm feeling much better about the negative now. But it should still be in the affirmative kind of section of the graph, assuming an evenly matched debate. After the 1NC, that win probability should shoot in the direction of the negative. The judges think, wow, there's a lot of good arguments in the 1NC. The negative has introduced either a really specific strategy, or they've had several strategies. The affirmative, they're all kind of sensible responses to the affirmative. The 1NC was delivered really well. I got all of their arguments. It kind of matches the cross-sex. I'm feeling negative about this. I'm feeling that the negative has a much better chance than I thought before the speech happened. And then the cross-sex happens, and it upticks toward the affirmative again. The affirmative calls into question, what about this K-all thing? How does that work? Or this link to politics doesn't seem very good. In fact, your whole politics system doesn't seem very good. And the judge is like, oh yeah, some of that stuff that sounded real negative, it's more affirmative now. I'm getting back closer to the middle. And then the 2AC happens, and that win probability chart shoots up toward the affirmative. The affirmative does well. The affirmative has, attacked all of the disadvantages and the counterpoints and the critiques and topicality, covered their case. They were fast, and they were smart, and they were clear, and they handled the negative strategy. Now the affirmative has a better chance of winning the debate again. And then there's the cross-test. And then there's the negative block. And the negative block is kind of a key point to assess relative win probability. Because if the negative is not far ahead in the debate after the negative block, it is very unlikely that they're going to win the debate, just structurally. Because after the negative block, the affirmative gets 2 more speeches to drive that win probability in the direction of the affirmative. And the negative only gets 1. And that one negative speech is really difficult. So if the affirmative, if it's like 50-50 or even like 60-40 in favor of the negative after the negative block, I'm feeling affirmative, kind of, if I'm assessing that debate kind of objectively, because if the 1AR gives a good speech and the 2AR gives a good speech, even if the 2NR gives a good speech, the affirmative is likely to eclipse that 50% mark, because they get 2 more chances. So a good negative block has to think about how can I really develop the negative ballots and the negative possibilities for giving the 2NR in a way that buries the affirmative, that kind of puts the affirmative in a really bad strategic position. So that even if the 1AR gives a great speech, they're only getting it back up to about even, or maybe slightly affirmative. But they're not getting it all the way back to like solid affirmative like it was after the 2AC. Because that's a tough spot for the negative to be in. So let's say the negative kind of buries the affirmative, gives a great negative block. They extended the right strategies and they were really smart. They didn't drop anything. It was great line value debating, some good connections. They kept open a couple of options, or they decided on one that was really well developed. The judge is thinking negative. That win probability graph is way down here toward the bottom of the chart. It's very negative. The affirmative in the 1AR has to shoot that graph back up. It has to think, how can I get us back in the game? How can I get the win probability for the affirmative back up to 50% or a little bit more? And then the negative will try to shoot it back down, and the affirmative will try to shoot it back up. And all debates are kind of that ebb and flow. Now, a bad debate can get out of whack. Maybe the 2AC drops something, so the negative block starts with a better chance of winning the debate than the affirmative. And that makes it really easy for the negative. Or maybe the negative block messes some things up. They mess up something on politics, or they mess up something on topicality. They had a couple of strategies, but one of those strategies isn't very viable. Then they end the negative block kind of close to 50-50. In that case, the affirmative is in great shape. The 1AR is going to just kind of crush it. It's going to be like 80% chance half wins, and then even with an excellent 2NR, even an average 2AR is going to get the job done with the affirmative. I think of all debates like that, and I think like that without consciously thinking about it. That's just kind of how I think about debates, or feel debates, or experience debates as I'm listening to them. And I think that the best student debaters do the same thing. They just kind of intuitively understand that ebb and flow between speeches, and they do everything in their power to accurately kind of move the trigger, to kind of move the lever more toward their side, to kind of get the needle to, it's a constant back and forth. They want that needle more on their side. And they think consciously about relative win probability throughout the debate. Number 4, think forward, not backward. Think forward, not backward. The end game of every debate is the 2NR and the 2ARs, the final rebuttals. You should constantly, before, during, beginning stages and middle stages of debate, be thinking about what you're going to say in those last speeches and what the other team is going to say in those last speeches, and then figure out how to design a debate, because I think that students design the debate. Sometimes think, I don't design the debate just is as it is. That's not true. You design the debate. Design a debate that gets you to a favorable comparison of the 2NR and the 2AR. So if you're affirmative, you want a favorable end game between the 2AR and the 2NR. If you're negative, you want a favorable end game between the 2NR and the 2AR. A lot of these concepts are kind of derived from chess, and I'm not a very good chess player, but I think in another life, if I was exposed to chess instead of debate, I really like chess, because a lot of, I've got a couple of quotes in here about from chess players. One of them, my favorite, is from Jose Raul Capablanca, who was a Cuban chess player. He says, in order to improve your game, you must study the end game before everything else. For whereas the endings can be studied and mastered by themselves, the middle game and the opening must be studied in relation to the end game. And that's how I think about debate. You can't design the 1NC. You can't design the 1AC. You can't design the 2AC. You can't design the negative block unless you've already mapped out the end game, the 2NR, the 2AR. If you first design your 1AC And then you design the 1 NC if you're negative. That's your first thing. You design the 1 NC. But you haven't thought about your 2AR in your affirmative. You haven't thought about your 2NR when you're negative. Then you've done it all wrong, because the debate is not about the opening speeches. The opening speeches are a means to an end, and the end is the end game, the final rebuttal speeches. A corollary piece of advice, or kind of a related piece of advice that I'm going to keep under the same heading, is that you should debate the next speech, not the last speech. And by last, I mean like the previous speech. You should be debating the last speeches as in the final speeches. So I guess a better way to label this is debate the next speech, not the previous speech. In your appendices document, there is another block title or whatever, another F6 that has that an example of this under it. So look at that one. We're imagining that the affirmative read an Indian Ocean slocks advantage, just like the one in the packet, and they have part of that as an economy impact. They say that would kill the economy and that would cause war. And the 1AC says economic decline causes war. We got a study that says that. They read that royal card there. The 1MC kind of logically replies, economic decline doesn't cause war. The 2008 recession didn't cause an uptick in violence, so disproves the thesis. Very reasonable. The 2AC replies, and they say economic decline does cause war. For our study, the 2008 recession did have geopolitical ramifications, even though it wasn't a full-blown economic decline. The act prevents a much bigger decline that would certainly cause war. I mean, that's pretty realistic. That's what a 2AC might say. Now, there are two ways of thinking about your next move as the negative. One way is to look backward, to look at the 2AC, and to think that the 2NC's job, we'll say the 2NC is taking this advantage, is to answer the previous speech, is to answer the 2AC. If you were answering the 2AC, you could say the following. Economic decline doesn't cause war. Number one, the Great Recession of 2008 didn't spark any wars. Their studies demonstrate correlation, not causation. Even if some declines in the past caused war, that's no longer the case. And two, there's no risk of full-blown collapse. Central banks will quickly react to rescue failing markets or falling markets. 2008 proof. Right? That's a pretty good response to the 2AC. I think that answers what the 2AC said. It's relatively smart. And I didn't put any cards in here, but any of this could be supported by scholars. But we already know, based on that, what the 1AR is going to say. Okay? So from the negative perspective, we know what's coming next. And what's coming next is the 1AR is going to say this. Economic decline will cause war. Number one, prefer studies to anecdotes. Even if some economic slowdowns don't directly cause war, they do make it more likely because of diversionary theory and the rally around the flag effect, staples of economic decline debating. And number two, our scenario is full-blown collapse. If Indian Ocean slocks are attacked, 90% of global shipping will grind to a halt. This would have immense spillover effects. Without access to energy shipments, economies won't survive, even if central banks step in. Stimulus money is useless unless there are products to buy. You can see that coming. It's not none of that is creative or smart. I mean, it's smart, but it's not like unprecedented. It's not like I needed to be a fortune teller to understand that that's what was coming next. Then the negative in the 2NR is forced to respond to those arguments for the first time. So they got to answer diversionary theory, they got to answer rally around the flag, they got to answer the internal into Indian Ocean slocks, and why supply chain disruptions are going to be a kind of a unique economic blow. And in the time pressure 2NR, that's really difficult. You kind of have to construct your frontline answers to the warrants and the affirmative evidence. You're not going to do that, right? You're going to just extend again. You talked about this cause war, 2008. It disproves correlation causation. Central banks will stop total decline. That's a bad way to do debate, right? Because that you know what's coming, and you know that if what is coming comes, the negative is in a bad spot, and the rest of the debate is going to be difficult. Because even if you answer that stuff in the 2NR, the 2AR will develop their answer, and they get to speak last, and you're going to be time pressured in 2NR, you're going to have to deal with other things. That's just not going to go. You just know, if you're smart, that that's not going to go. Instead, time machine back to your 2NC. Don't just prep your answer to the 2AC. Prep your answer to what that argument is going to evolve into in its best version in the 1AR and 2A. So say this instead. Economic decline doesn't cause war. One, the Great Recession disproves their study. Correlation doesn't prove causation. Even if some declines in the past cause war, that's no longer the case because central banks can and will step in and rescue markets. Two, no diversionary theory or rally around the flag effect. The U.S. is war weary because of Iraq and Afghanistan. Even if economic turmoil could be used to justify foreign adventurism, it's more likely to cause America to turn inward and focus its attention on domestic affairs. Three, AF doesn't access full collapse. No scenario for sustained closure of Indian Ocean slocks. Even if one is attacked, shipments will be routed other places. Supply chains are resilient and disruptions are only temporary. Okay? It's slightly more words, okay? So it does require a little bit more investment in the negative block. That's a fair observation, but it's not that many more words. And think of how dramatically you have changed the game, right? If that's your response, the 1AR, and we know that the 1AR is time pressure, and the 1AR wants something that is easy. The 1AR is very unlikely to be able to substantively defend, rally around the flag effect, diversionary theory, or the idea that Indian Ocean slots will just kind of end and that there will be no global trade. Because those arguments are not true. Those arguments aren't developed. Those are just strategically introduced arguments in the 1AR against the previous version of the 2NC because they are things that the negative has not answered. And so they kind of raise the bar and give the negative something else to answer in the 2NR. That's an instinct of debating. When the other team answers your arguments, you try to add something new that they haven't answered yet to force them to answer that instead. It's very rare that you just kind of take them on and engage them and just like don't say that there's something new or something that they've missed or a distinction that is important that they didn't understand. If you instead answer the future version of their argument, you have deprived them of the opportunity for the easy move, right? You've deprived them of the opportunity to get the easy 1AR. So they are stuck with a choice. Either give up on this impact, which is good for you, and you've accomplished your goal, and you've made your 2NR easier, or engage this impact, but do it superficially, kind of how they always would, in which case, it's a win for you. Your 2NR can kind of quickly dispense with the argument. You've already answered their argument. You can develop it slightly into 2NR. Or they have to choose to invest the prep time and the speech time into substantively developing a nuanced response to your kind of good challenge to their argument, in which case, it's still a win because you're in a better relative strategic position than you were in either of the other two approaches. Does that make sense? Almost every speech, almost every argument that you answer, this is how you should be thinking about it. So if you're negative and you're giving the negative block, you don't answer the 2AC. Certainly you answer the arguments in the 2AC in the sense that that's where the arguments start. But you kind of use what the 2AC said to predict what the 1AR and 2AR are going to say, and you answer the affirmative, right? You answer what they are going to say, the best version of the argument they're going to make. You could, kind of decide, I'm going to just answer what the 2AC said, in the hopes that what they have said in the 2AC does not evolve into the better version of the argument in the 1AR, or the better version of the argument in the 2AR. But then what you have done is you have ceded your opportunity to control and direct the design of the debate to fate and to your opponent's kind of inadequacies or incompetencies, right? You're just kind of hedging your bets on they'll mess up. They won't be smart enough to make those arguments. That they're just not that good. And that works when you're debating in kind of the low levels and the mid levels of debate. But if you're debating in the high levels of debate, they're going to make those arguments, right? If you're debating He-Man's in here, if you're debating He-Man, he's going to figure it out by the 2AR. Maybe the 2AC argument wasn't very smart. He'll figure it out. If you can figure it out and answer it before you can develop it, then you've got a shot to win the debate. If you're like, well, I'll just hope that He-Man doesn't figure it out by the 2AR and say the more intelligent version of this, I'm just going to assume it's the worst version. You're kind of the silliest version, the least developed version that they said in the 2AC. I'm just going to answer that and then hope. You're going to lose a lot, okay? And it's going to suck. You're going to be sad about that. But it was not fate, it was your decision. It was your decision to kind of use the negative blocks to do the easy stuff, and to answer the easy stuff, and to not think ahead, and so you have chosen your own fate. It wasn't fate, it was your decision. The same thing is true on the affirmative. Don't answer the bad version of their alternative. Don't answer the bad version of their critique. Don't answer the bad version of their topicality argument. Don't answer the bad version of their case takeout, or of their dissat, or whatever. We have a tendency to do that because we want their argument to be bad. We need their argument to be bad. If their argument is bad, we can win. We desperately want to win. And sometimes our hope and our just kind of deep pining for the other team saying bad stuff and stupid stuff and undeveloped stuff and unexplained stuff and just bad arguments and just being bad. We just so much want the other team to be bad that we miss the fact that we can control whether what they say is smart or not based on what we say, right? We can force them to make good arguments. And we can challenge them to make good arguments. We can force them to complete arguments and challenge them to complete arguments. It's all to us. It's not them. And that's why this kind of whole lecture is about how much control and how much power you have to shape and control debates, to design debates. And I think this is a great example of that. Answer the subsequent speech, the speech to come, not the speech that just finished, not the previous speech. Number 5, Roman numeral number 5. Strategically map debates. Strategically map debates. zip file, and there's a bunch of things inside that zip file. And we don't have a ton of time to kind of carefully go through all of these things. But what these are, so I would first open up case flow visuals, the Excel document. There are two maps of a debate. And the way that what this is this is a visual representation of the flow of the debate, and the colors represent argument units invested by each side. And it's just sort of an arbitrary thing that was made up. You only have so much time in any given speech. You only have so much time to develop your arguments. You can kind of divide that into generally argument units. Number one and number two give vastly different kind of stories or visions or pictures of how a debate evolves on the case on a particular advantage. So if we imagine this is the Indian Ocean slots advantage, the far left column is the 1NC. They've made 6 arguments. Then the 2AC has answered them. The 2NC or 1NR in this first example has gone for all of those arguments and kind of just repeated them, maybe done a little development of them. The 1AR has just covered, answered them all again. The 2NR has extended all of them, just kind of said that repeated them. And then the 2AR has answered all of them. This is one kind of picture of a debate. This is one way that a debate can go down in a debate about the case. Number two is a vastly different picture of the debate. It's a vastly different kind of shot of what happened on this particular advantage in the debate. Same thing in the 1NC and 2AC. The 1NC said 6 arguments. The 2AC said 6 arguments, kind of answered them all. But in this case, the negative bloc decided only to extend 3 of them. They extended 2 of them in a great deal of depth, and then they extended a third, you're just kind of minimal. The 1AR responded in kind. And the 2NR made an even more focused decision. They only really went for 1 argument, and they really emphasized that last argument against this advantage. And they also extended another argument, kind of a complementary argument, and the affirmative responded in kind. You can map any sequence of debate arguments in this way. The rest of the visuals are about a 2AC and kind of onward on an off-case position. But in terms of the case, one of these approaches is kind of extend everything, and hopefully the kind of death by 1,000 cuts will mean that we've mitigated the advantage enough in the 2NR from the negatives perspective to outweigh the case. The second one thinks, if I do that kind of death by 1,000 cuts approach, the judge won't think that I've really developed any of my arguments in a great deal of depth. I won't really win a lot of defense against that advantage. Instead, I'm going to decide and commit to really win one major objection to the advantage that will minimize its risk, and then one kind of secondary one that hopefully complements my mainline answer to that advantage. And in the vast majority of cases, that second approach is the better approach, and that's kind of true of all debates. The affirmative visuals are the same. So open up the 1AR visual for Bulldogs, the first PNG file. In this case, this is a picture of a 1NC on a politics disadvantage, and then the 2AC is the 2AC column, and they made their 5 answers. And then what the negative did in response, they had their big overview, and they kind of said something against all those line-by-line arguments. And in response, the affirmative only answered the overview and really developed that second 2AC argument. Okay? That's one kind of 1AR strategy. If you open up the next one, the Crimson Tide one, the affirmative took a totally different approach. They answered the overview, and then they extended every line-by-line argument. And they only, maybe they had a little bit extra on number 2, but basically they just extended all of the arguments. Vastly different approaches. The Gators one is a similar version, but they even forgot to answer the overview, right? They invested in the line by line, they extended every argument, but they let the negatives overview just kind of float up there. Probably not going to be a good outcome for the affirmative. And then the Yellow Jackets one, they answered the overview, they had one big argument on the line by line, and they had 2 kind of small arguments on the line by line. You can map any 1AR on an off-case position in this way, and you can think about and think through how your decision about how to allocate time will affect your chances of winning the debate. In some debates, the version that kind of just extends a lot of 2AC arguments makes sense. It would make sense based on a strategic context in which you didn't think that disadvantage was very likely to be gone for. You wanted to kind of raise the stakes, and the negative just kind of force them to go through the motions on several things. Or you think that just kind of even brief extensions of those arguments are sufficient to undermine the dissent. Against a better negative argument, against in a better debate, one of these approaches that answers the overview, but then kind of selects a really well-developed 1AR entree-sized kind of filling argument on the line-by-line is a much better approach. And you can make it even a little bit better by adding in a couple of other arguments to help supplement that argument, kind of force the 2NR to explain something that otherwise wouldn't have had to. Or kind of make an argument that the way the negative is going to answer it will affect the argument that you really want to go for, and maybe it'll help on that argument. But you should intentionally, thoughtfully think through what you want your map of a particular position to be within the debate. So you want to know what you want your counterplan map to look like. You want your critique map to look like. And that's the way that I encourage you to think about decisions about how many arguments to extend, how long to spend on a particular argument. There's no checklist. There's no like right or wrong answer. There's no way to always do it. But in general, figuring out ways to get deeper than your opponent on the arguments that are going to matter in the 2NR and the 2AR is the way to win close debates. There's another visual map in the appendices thing, and it's called Appendix 3, the shape of a debate. And you have to view it in print layout in order to see the picture, I believe, depending on what kind of word you have. This is kind of the previous visuals were kind of snapshots within a debate. So one was about the negative case arguments on an advantage. The other was about a politics disadvantage. This steps up even higher and is the view of the entire debate, and kind of what the function of the debate speeches are in terms of the shape of the debate and the way the debate evolves. The 1AC kind of begins, they have some breadth and they have some depth. They're introducing the debate, they're starting the debate, and they want to have a wide variety of arguments, but they want those arguments to be relatively well developed. The negative usually introduces even more kind of breadth to the debate with a little bit less development than the 1AC. That's kind of the function of the 1NC in most debates. And the 2AC continues that trend. The debate kind of keeps getting wider. There's still not a ton of development of any particular argument, but our options for where the debate might go kind of continue to expand. And then the negative block's job is to do the kind of huge development of the debate. That's where we start to kind of fill in all of the details. That's when the debate gets deep. When I talked about the win probability assessments, that's the reason that the negative needs to be so far ahead. Because if you look at kind of the overarching picture of the debate, the depth that the negative gets by the end of the debate is mostly done in the negative block. The 1AR then kind of debate narrows again. Some possibilities for where the debate might have gone are eliminated. Some are eliminated in the negative block, some are eliminated in the 1AR. There's some depth, there's still a little bit of breadth. And then the 2NR narrows that focus even more. More possibilities for what could have happened at the end of that debate are eliminated. More of them are lost to time. Now, they didn't happen in this debate. They might have, but they didn't. And then the 2AR again kind of narrows the focus. And even after the 2NR, there are multiple possibilities for how the 2AR might happen. But the 2AR kind of condenses again and adds more depth. This is something that Ross Smith taught me a long time ago. And I think it's a great way to conceptualize what the function of the different speeches in debate is. And there can be deviations for this. Sometimes the negative block keeps the debate relatively wide. Sometimes the 1NC keeps the debate relatively narrow and deepens it. But you should be thinking about what you're doing and why you're doing it. You shouldn't just do it because that's what you do. You shouldn't just kind of always give the same kind of 1NC. You shouldn't always give the same kind of 2AC. You shouldn't always give the same kind of negative block. You should think about what your decision about time allocation and argument selection and prioritization and your roadmap and all those things, what they do to the shape of the debate. Because the shape of the debate affects the outcome of the debate. The debate in which the negative has more depth on the arguments that are relevant in the final rebuttals, in the end game, is a debate where the negative is more likely to win. A debate where the affirmative has more depth on the arguments that are in the final rebuttals, that are in the end game, is more likely to win. And you should think about how to design your debates so that your side accomplishes that end, so that you have the deeper analysis and you have more speech resources, and more evidence resources, more explanation resources, and more connection resources, all of that stuff you have available to you, that more of your stuff, all of those resources are in the judge's hands at the end of the debate about the important issues than the other stuff. Does that make sense? All right. Number 6, and this is the last one. Constantly rehearse strategic interactions. Constantly rehearse strategic interactions. So I once asked Seth Gannon, I don't even know if I necessarily asked him or if he had just come in and he might have asked this question of others. But the question was, what is like the best debate tip you could give or that you've ever gotten? And he said that he thought his best tip was you should think about debate when you're in the shadow. Okay, I never won that. But his point was that he thinks that great debaters are thinking about debate a lot. And they're not thinking about debate in the sense that they're just cutting cards or they're just writing blocks or they're just giving speeches, but that they are thinking through debates and that they are thinking and rehearsing and simulating debates in their mind. When you think about debate, you kind of simulate the strategic interactions that are going to occur in an actual debate, and you think through what's going to happen. So imagine, we say this affirmative, what are they likely to say? All right, well if they say that, how are we going to respond? Okay, if we respond in that way, what are they going to say in response to that? Okay, if they respond in to our 2AC with those negative block arguments. What are we going to go for in the 1AR? Okay, if we go for that in the 1AR, what are they going to go for in the 2NR? Okay, if they go for that 2NR, can we win? And how do we win? Okay. And if the answer is yes, like you've rehearsed a pretty good strategy. But there's even more facets to that. What if they don't respond like that? You can't be certain. They might respond like this. All right, well, let me simulate what would happen then. All right, they respond like this, we respond like that, they respond like this, we respond like that. I like that one, we win. Okay. But what if they respond like this? Well, they respond like this, we respond like that, they respond like this, we respond like we're going to lose that debate. Okay, so then going back to this, how do we get them to decide to say this instead of this? Well, what if we change this other argument in the 1NC? If we change this other argument in the 1NC, or this other argument in the 2AC, whatever, I've lost track of what side I'm on, then how does that constrain their options? Or how does that change the decisions that they will make? How can we force them to make this choice in the negative block, which then begets this affirmative choice, which begets this 2NR choice, which begets this 2AR, and we win, right? Debate is like chess, as I said, and here's kind of two more quotes that I think are really awesome. When you see a good move, look for a better one. That's something from Emanuel Lasker, who was a German chess player. Don't just settle on like, all right, I think we'll say the K and we'll win. Okay, I can go for the K and they can't answer the K very well, I'll win. I got it. Or I've thought through the strategic interaction, if things go well, I think we got a chance. Right? Don't just stop there. Keep thinking about it. Keep looking for a better move. Keep thinking for ways to tweak the earlier speeches to get your end game situation better, to get your kind of expected end of the debate nexus issue more tailored to what you think you can win and what you think can kind of give your arguments the better shot to win. The last one is my favorite quote of all time, I think. Bruce A. Moon. A chess game is a dialogue, a conversation between a player and his opponent. Each move by the opponent may contain threats or be a blunder, but a player cannot defend against threats or take advantage of blunders if he does not first ask himself, what is my opponent planning after each move? Oh, love it, okay? A lot of you see your opponents do something, you're like, ooh, that's a threat. Threatening argument, gotta deal with it. Or, ooh, the opponent did that, that's a blunder, gonna take advantage of that. You can't know whether something is a threat and how that thing is a threat, how to deal with that threat, or whether something is a blunder and why it's a blunder and how to take advantage of that blunder, unless you know what they're going to do next. Okay? You can't just respond to that initial thing, because a lot of times you respond and then you respond to the blunder, you try to take advantage of it, and that begets a different response by your opponent than you had expected, or you hadn't expected anything. It catches you off guard. And it turns out that by trying to take advantage of their blunder, you've actually put yourself in a worse strategic position. So maybe, they dropped this argument against the case. I saw a practice debate, they dropped economic interdependence against China war. And so, haha, we've won the China war advantage. And then the firm was like, concede that. That means that there's no miscalculation and there's no war between the US and Russia, and even if there's a terrorist attack, economic interdependence would stop nations from fighting with each other. You have no politics to say. And then he was like, oh, well, economic interdependence isn't that strong because terrorism overcomes economic interdependence, and countries become irrational if there was terrorism. So yeah, we still have a dissad. And the affirmative was like, no, you don't. Economic interdependence is so powerful, as you described when you were pointing out our blunder, that it takes their dissad. And I was like, really? That's very good, right? Knowing that what they were going to say next, the negative could have taken advantage of that strategic blunder in a different way. They conceded economic interdependence stops US-China war. That takes out the advantage. It doesn't take out our dissad because make some arguments about that. Don't go nuts about how economic interdependence is totalizing and perfect and controlling all wars. It's particularly helpful in stopping the US-China war because they're big trading partners and all that. Be specific. And then insulate your dissent preemptively to what you know the affirmative is going to say in response. Because as we remember, the kind of realist tenets of what your opponent is thinking and the structures of your opponent, they're going to try to win and they're going to do something in response. They're not going to give up. They're not going to be like, oh, we dropped economic interdependence, touche. Have a good next debate. Well, we're going to go to lunch, right? They're going to try to do something that gets them back to winning the debate. Great debaters, I think, kind of know, you get the sense that they know what's going to happen before it happens. And some students, when they see that, they're like, wow, magic. He must seem to know what was coming. He must just have gotten a gift from God, right? There must be just something, it's in the water and bacon. They just they drink the water and then they can see in the future. No. He just thought about the future, right? He thought about what was going to happen next, and then he acted accordingly. It's not magic. It's not soothsaying. It's not fortune telling. It's not palm reading. It's just understanding your strategic environment, understanding what is likely to happen and why, understanding motivations and opportunities and tendencies, and then predicting them based on your best available intuition or hunch or speculation or whatever, and then acting accordingly. The corollary to that is that you have to plan for things not going how you thought they would go. You have to have a contingency plan, or 2 contingency plans, or 3 contingency plans, because you know that you don't have perfect knowledge of your opponent. Sometimes your opponent should have made a certain decision, and you kind of thought through that, and if they made the best response, this is what it would be, and you thought through that whole debate, and you kind of had it on lockdown, and you were going to win, but they didn't make the argument they should have. They made a different argument. You should have anticipated that. You should have thought about what they might do, what they could have done, even if it's not the best thing that they could have done, and you should have a plan for dealing with that. There's a cool example of this that I think is cool. So I'm a huge Brewers fan, and I hate the Cardinals. But I respect the Cardinals. And one thing that happened in the preseason that made me just both angry and respectful at the same time is there was talk last year that Major League Baseball would institute an instant replay plan. But there was no specification of when that would happen, or there was no it's going to happen in this year. It did end up happening in this year. But they didn't say that last year. So there was just talk about it. It was possible that we'd do replay, but we didn't know exactly the contours of replay. And last season, just based on that speculation, the St. Louis Cardinals simulated replay the entire season, which is crazy, right? Replay had not been announced. It was not part of the game. But they thought a year in advance. They were like, if replay happens next year, wouldn't it be really good if we were prepared for that? So Mike McKee, who's the manager, who's a former Brewer, now he's the manager of the Cardinals. So sad. Studied how to do replay best. So they experimented with having different people do the video, the location of the video room, and how to communicate the information from the video room to the manager, and how the manager approaches the umpire, and kind of what the standard is for whether the manager should challenge or not. They simulated the whole thing. Mike McKinney said, basically, realizing that this was coming, we started talking about it even though we didn't know the timing of it. And I was like, God, Cardinal. Ugh. But at the same time, I was like, ooh, debaters, okay? You don't know, just like Mike McKinney didn't know the replay was for sure going to happen this year, you don't know at any particular time when a certain thing will happen in a debate. You don't know when you're going to have to debate wipeout. You don't know when they're going to kick out of everything in 5 minutes of fish down in one error. You don't know when they're going to concede this thing, and straight turn this thing, and impact turn this thing. Who knows? You don't know all the crazy stuff that's going to happen in debate. But what you do know is that there's a chance that any of those crazy things is going to happen in a debate. And the more that you have planned for that, and the more that you have anticipated that, even though you don't know that it's going to happen, the better position you will be in if it happens. So this year, replay did happen. And the Cardinals are good at replay because they did this for an entire year. A lot of other teams are really struggling. They didn't know what to do. It took them a month or 2 to get used to it. They had to use spring training time to work on replay instead of do their usual preparation. And that messed with a lot of Major League Baseball teams, but not the Cardinals, because they thought about planning this in advance. And they thought about planning for it in advance even though it was not a guarantee. And I think what a lot of you do is that you only plan for things that are guaranteed. You only plan for things that you know are going to happen, if you plan for things at all. And a smart debater, a debater with situational awareness and strategic vision that just kind of knows how to win, and that thinks about debate, and that wants to kind of be that soothsayer that everybody says is an awesome, just kind of debate magician, will have thought through those contingencies even though most of them will never come to fruition. And if they do come to fruition, you've thought about it. And if they haven't, you've taught yourself to think more strategically about debate. You have reaped a benefit even if the particular manifestation of that preparation never happens. And that's an amazing kind of thing I want to finish on, which is that the more you think about debate, the more you rehearse, the more you strategize, the more you imagine, the more you simulate, the more you predict, the more you interact and question and just kind of watch and feel and just kind of view debate. The more you're an observer of debate and kind of a student of debate, the better you will be at knowing whether you're winning, knowing whether you're losing, knowing why, and knowing how to fix it if you're losing, and knowing how to. So that's my thing. So we'll stop now. And He-Man, can you turn off the camera?
Yeah, hopefully.
You just have to press the main button.
I could probably do that.